Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to my new video. So if you haven't done so already, guys, make sure you join my new channel. Make sure you subscribe to it. The links are on my description. I'm still using this channel because there's still 29,000 subscribers still left on this channel because my new channel has only got about 800 subscribers now. So people are slowly coming through. So I'm gonna kind of swap between the two channels until I get a sufficient number. I'm looking to get at least maybe 3,000 maybe, and then all the new videos are going to be on my new channel. But you can see from the new channel, guys, I'm doing actually quite well. I've got 800 subscribers, but my video is like getting 1,000 views. So it's a very good ratio, you can see. So having a new channel is actually helping. It's actually going to be growing my channel very fast. Anyway, going back to the main story, it's over, guys. Absolutely over. So you can see from this picture, this is not AI, by the way. This is a real picture that was posted, and you can you can see Trump absolutely subservient to President Xi. And also, guys, I think there was a couple of chairs in China, and when President Trump sat down in one of the chairs, he looked so weak and timid compared to President Xi. And he sat down very similar to how von der Leyen sat near Trump. I don't know, guys. I don't know if you guys remember von der Leyen when she went to the White House. Was it the White House or she went somewhere to meet Trump? I think it was the Mar-a-Lago, could have been. And she sat down. She looked so weak and timid, and she looked so scared sitting in front of Trump. And obviously, Trump bullied her into getting some trade deals. So this is the picture, guys. You can see how timid she looks, and Trump is obviously looking at him. He looks very joyful and looks happy he was bullied her, basically. And she came alone as well. When she goes to China, she takes all of her team and she gets all of her team to do the dirty work. They start talking about human rights. They start talking about China's creating too many products. They talk about anything to smear China, basically. And the last few times they went to China to talk about all of these things, they got ushered out. The meeting was basically short, and they all got kicked out the room, and she got sent back home using standard going through the standard airport, going through the barrier gates and everything, not VIP, anything like that. So look at the way she's sitting. She looks very weak and timid. Um, and I want to show you the picture of Trump now. Give me a second. They look exactly the same, right? You look at Trump. Trump, you would never see Trump sitting like this in the White House. Looking very weak and timid. And look at the way she is sitting. Very subservient. Very subservient. So it's over, guys. I mean, the thing is, it's a very different trip when Trump went last time to China about 10 years ago. That time, America had all the cards, right? China was very dependent on America. Huawei was dependent on America. They were buying American chips and, well, TSMC chips, but obviously, America has all the say whether TSMC can sell to Huawei or not. And Huawei was also having different parts of their phone business coming from United States as well. And all of China's tech companies, they were all having parts from United States. China at the time didn't really have much of a semiconductor industry. They had SMIC, but back then SMIC was very small compared to now, and they didn't really invest much in their semiconductor industry at the time. So China was very dependent on America at the time. Then Trump came in and started doing all the trade sanctions on China. China was also dependent on American energy. They were buying a lot of energy at the time. They were buying a lot of soybeans and agricultural goods. They were buying a lot from America at the time, guys. They were really dependent 10 years ago. And Trump knew he had all the cards. And what did he do with all the cards? He started bullying China. He thought China would become a puppet state like everyone else if he bullied them into submission. But it didn't work because when he tried all these sanctions on China, China didn't back down. China basically started building their own industry, and they took it like a challenge, and everybody worked hard. And today you see the results. Trump has no cards to play, so because he has no cards to play, he has to bow down to President Xi and to China. So, what did this trip, what wins did Trump get from this trip? Nothing, guys. Absolutely nothing. If you look at the readouts from China, China did not promise anything or did not buy anything. You know, th- with the Boeing planes, they were supposed to buy 500 Boeing planes, but China said they might buy 200. They didn't promise it, by the way. They said they might buy 200, but it all depends on Boeing's quality and safety standards. Because if you remember, there's a lot of Boeing planes that are falling from the sky. So China said before they buy Boeing planes again, they have to check all the safety procedures and all the standards are correct and things like that. So they said they might buy 200, not 500. And as a result, Boeing's shares started going down. So they also the White House also said that China's going to buy H200 from Nvidia. But China came out with a statement saying, we never promised we will buy H200. We'd rather focus on our own development and buy Huawei chips instead and use that money to build our own chips. That's what China said. So they never promised they would buy the H200. Trump says that China promised that Iran shouldn't charge tolls on the Strait of Hormuz and China would help. China never said that. In their official statement, again, it said, we stand by Iran and their sovereignty. We know because at the end of the day, guys, Chinese ships are still going through without toll. Why should China help the Americans out? America put themselves in this mess, so let them sort it out. They need to directly sort it out with Iran, give compensation to all of the damages they did to Iran, and then Iran will kind of let them have the strait and open it up. So I'm sure that behind the scenes, the President Xi told this to Trump. They do not support America attacking Iran and uh, and especially the infrastructure and killing all these innocent civilians and school kids and things like that. So I'm sure behind the scenes, President Xi told this to Trump and gave him a real, talking down. In front of his face, in front of the media, he basically told the United States they are the declining power. And the Americans are so, sorry to use this word, they are really stupid, guys. Even Trump didn't realize this insult, he didn't realize this insult, basically, that President Xi was telling Americans they're declining power because you see Trump every single day saying in front of his MAGA supporters, America is the best, America is the greatest, we are back, we are back, we are nobody can beat us, we have the best military, all this stuff in front of his MAGA supporters. But now China is basically telling America the truth. They are a declining power. And this is the first leader that told this to Trump in front of his face. And Trump is too stupid enough to realize what was said. And it's only later on that somebody explained it to him, and then he put out a tweet saying the reason President Xi said we are declining power is because of Biden. He started blaming Biden for it. He said, he's not blaming me, he's blaming Biden. But in the day, it's not Biden who's in charge, it's Trump who's in charge. Also, this is how Chinese diplomacy works, guys, because, you know, th- they have been doing this for over 5,000 years, and they do this to all the leaders. And Trump was shown great hospitality. They gave him lots of praise, lots of gifts. They took him round to the Imperial Garden. They gave him a great banquet. You know, it was a, they gave him a parade. You know, basically China went all out to please Trump, and Trump loves this kind of stuff because he's got an ego size of a, size of a football pitch. So he loves this kind of stuff. So he wasn't thinking about what President Xi was saying to him. He was just, dazzled by all of the stuff that's happening around him. There was an incident where Trump was checking President Xi's notebook, uh, and it's all over the internet. It's going viral. I don't think Trump meant anything bad by it, to be honest. I mean, I think probably President Trump looked at it because he was curious. He was, I think he was checking the book whether President Xi was writing in his notebook or not, or was it empty? Because a lot of people, in the West, a lot of people take their notepads to meetings and they never write anything on their notepad. And that's how you know when somebody's, working hard or working not working hard. Because in my company, one day, um, at the end of a meeting, my CEO at the time, he asked to check everybody's notebook, and everybody was a bit strange. Why did he want to check our notebook? And he looked at everybody's notebook, and only two people wrote on the notebook. Only two people. Everyone else's notebook was empty. And only two people wrote on the notebook. And those two people that wrote in the notebook got immediate promoted right to, management level because he said that's his way to check if somebody's paying attention or working hard. He doesn't have time for lazy people in his workplace. So I think this is what Trump was checking. He was checking if President Xi was actually writing in his notebook or he's just observing. And I think when he checked and he saw that there's Chinese writing in there, I think he was just curious, to be honest, nothing more. This is typical Trump. He does that. This is the kind of thing he normally does. So I wouldn't say he did anything bad. So I think he was just curious. Obviously, he was all dazzled and dazzled by China. And even after when he came back, he said he wants his ballroom to look like the Great Hall in that he went to in China. So he said he wants his ballroom to look like that. So I think he was all dazzled by the experience. He didn't really understand or take in what President Xi was saying to him. And I think he was just totally, totally dazzled, to be honest. And all of his admin were dazzled as well, including Mark Rubio. He was checking the roof. He was checking the ceiling. He's like, "Oh wow, look at that! Look at that!" He's like a little child. And I think it's like I said, guys, it's very, very different from when Trump went to China in the first time. And now, 10 years is a long time in China. Things have changed a lot in China in 10 years. China is a lot more powerful now, a lot more modern. Infrastructure is a lot more modern. They have a much better military, much better tech. They have a much better standing internationally. So many things have changed in 10 years. Time moves very, very fast when you're in China. It's called It's called Chinatime. Things move very, very fast in China, and I think Trump was very, very shocked. And I think Trump is shocked even more because only a few months ago he was listening to Gordon Chang. Part of his team is, Peter Navarro. And Peter Navarro wrote a book based on Gordon Chang. And they got Gordon Chang's advice when he placed all these tariffs on China, the 145% tariffs. It was all Navarro and Gordon Chang giving Trump advice. They said that if Trump puts 145% tariffs on China, China would collapse. That's what they said. So he placed these tariffs on China, and guess what? Guess who collapsed? It was America that collapsed, not China. Their bond prices went through the roof. The stock market collapsed. The everything was collapsing around Trump. So he had to back down basically. So I think this is the first leader, American leader, that actually has gone to China with no cards, as a declining power. And it must be absolutely embarrassing for the West and for America. And I think most of people are absolutely shocked. Most of the MAGA were shocked. And it's shocking because Trump, in his first term and in his second term, he made it clear that China was the enemy. If you guys remember, he would stand up on stage and say things like, "China is eating our lunch. China, is ripping us off. They've been ripping us off for years. I'm going to put a stop to it." He's been making China into an enemy to, especially to justify his sanctions and tariffs on China, that was basically part of his MAGA movement to hate China. China's the enemy. They're eating our lunch. They're just, they are basically the reason for our economic downfall is because of China. That's the kind of language that Trump is making. Now, after being in China, I think he's completely shocked by it all because and even his MAGA supporters are completely shocked because Trump has completely turned around 180. One minute China's the enemy, next minute he's singing China's praises. He's saying how great China is and, basically how great she is. And, so all of this talk about China being the enemy, China's eating the lunch. So what was all that for? What was the point of all these sanctions all these years and tariffs and destroying the American economy? What was the point of all that then? If he's going to turn around and suddenly say, "Oh, China is great. I love China." So what? So all these 8 years that he's been in power, plus Biden also carried on lots of Trump's work. So 12 years, guys, of anti-China rhetoric. If they worked with China in the beginning, none of this would have happened. All they had to do was just work with China, stop placing all these sanctions and tariffs on China, and China wouldn't be forced to become self-sufficient. And because of that, they've become much, much more powerful because of it. And I remember when Biden was the president, and China had the Olympic Games, the Winter Olympic Games, and I covered it as well. And all the Western leaders didn't turn up. What kind of diplomacy is that, guys? Nobody from the West turned up to China to watch the Beijing Olympic Games, the winter one. How embarrassing is it for the West? Because I think that was a time when China realized they don't really have any friends in the West. They have to rely on themselves and rely on the global South. Because the global South turned up, you know, Putin turned up, many of the global South leaders turned up, and the people that turned up, they got great deals from China. China signed some amazing deals with them. Like Putin got a great deal. That was a time when Putin signed the Power of Siberia 2 pipeline and many other oil and gas deals and many other deals as well. And many other countries were signing great deals. The West has got itself to blame for all of this. They could have, acted a lot more maturely throughout the years. But now they're having to play catch up now. Now they're going to be completely subservient to China. China's moving very, very fast ahead of all of them. Pretty soon, they'll, already you can see all the world leaders going to China with a begging bowl, asking for money, asking for things. Every single world leader is going to China now. It's like a fashion thing at the moment. They're all going to China, and yeah, they're all going there with a begging bowl. But where were they when China was struggling? It wasn't long when China was very, very poor. And China remembers when it was poor and who stood by China and who didn't. And there was not many countries that stood by China when they were poor. Not many, guys. It's easy to have friends when you're rich, but when you're poor, that's when you realize who your real friends are. So luckily for China, they know, who stood by them in their times of need, who turned up for the Olympic Games to support them, who didn't. Things like that matter, especially to China. None of these people that you see here, all these billionaires and Trump and none of them turned up for China's Olympic Games. And when China struggles, if China's stock market struggles or China collapses, I can guarantee you all of these people that turned up for China today, they will all be celebrating, saying, "Yeah, China's collapsed. China's stock market collapsed. Let's go steal some money from China." They'll all be trying to eat China's lunch because at the end of the day, they're all after the money, guys. They don't care about China. They just want the money from China. But when the money goes from China, what do you think they will do? They will eat China alive, like they did during the 100 years humiliation. But China's not going to allow that because China remembers very well what the West is like and what the West can do to China, especially when they're poor. So remember the date, guys, 15th of May 2026. This was the date the world has realized United States is no longer a sole superpower. Now there are two superpowers, side by side, and China is very, very fast, steaming ahead of United States, very, very fast, leaving them very fast behind. And it's their own fault, guys. It is all their own fault. You know, all of these wars that United States did in the last 100 years or so, most of them were over nothing, guys. Vietnam War over nothing, the war in Korea over nothing. It was all, they should have just left it alone. Korean people would have easily sorted out their differences by themselves. Same exactly what's happened with Vietnam. The Vietnam people managed to, after the war, managed to sort things out. And now look at Vietnam. They're thriving. Amazing country they've become now. So many wars in the Middle East. What for, guys? Over nothing. All these wars has caused refugees to flood into Europe. And then America has spent endless money in the Middle East. All they had to do was force Israel to do a peace deal with the Palestinians. And there's a UN charter with in 1967. These were borders that were UN approved, borders that were agreed upon. All America had to do was force Israel to stick to those 1967 borders that everyone agreed to internationally. And they could have avoided all these wars in the Middle East, guys. All of them they could have avoided. It's crazy. How much money has America spent on the Middle East? Trillions. 8 trillion in Iraq and Afghanistan alone. I mean, these are official figures. God knows how much they've spent in Iran. God knows how much they've spent toppling Syria. God knows how much they've spent attacking Libya, and all the military bases in the Middle East, and all the bribes, and all the you know, and plus all the refugees that flooded into Europe. I mean, it's cost. We're talking about you know 20 trillion they probably would have spent in the Middle East. They should have just left that region alone. Forced Israel to have a peace deal with Palestinians, and then that region would have been in peace. And stop selling weapons to Israel. If they forced stop selling weapons to Israel, Israel would have been forced to make peace with its neighbors. The fact that America has, endlessly given weapons to Israel, and Israel, because they've got all these weapons and they've got the backing of the United States, they've been given the impunity to do whatever they want. And Israel doesn't want to stop in Palestine. You can see they want a greater Israel project. They want all of the Middle East. They want all that oil. They want to be a superpower. So it's not just that, guys. They've weaponized the dollar. They've weaponized tariff and sanctions. They've been sanctioning poor countries. They've been, for over nothing. They've been sanctioning, how many countries do you know that America has sanctions on? Over 150 countries they've got sanctions on. Maybe more, but, they've been tariffing all these countries, sanctioning so many countries if they don't like them, or if these countries, don't agree with the United States, or if Trump doesn't like them, they'll sanction them. So they've sanctioned the dollar, they've abused their power, guys. And they've abused human rights as well. There was a time when America was, the beacon of human rights and freedom and justice around the world. All of that is gone. They've just weaponized human rights. They allow Israel to do whatever they want, do a mass GEN. You know what I'm talking about. No, I can't say the word, by the way, because of YouTube. And and then they blame China for having a GEN in China, which is fake, obviously. Everyone knows it's fake, by the way. Everyone knows there's nothing like that happening in China. It's all media pushing fake stories to paint China badly. And I've been saying that from day one. And only a few people that have been on YouTube and they've been saying it, but mainstream media have been going along with it. So they've been weaponizing human rights. They've been weaponizing the dollar. They have been absolutely evil around. They've allowed Israel to do whatever they want, killing women and children. They've abused their power, guys. Absolutely abused their power. Nobody deserves that kind of power if you're going to abuse it. If you have that soul, if you're a soul superpower and you don't follow through on, justice and human rights around the world, and be consistent, then you don't deserve to be a sole superpower. So it's their own fault, guys. Absolutely their own fault. And I remember even when Nixon went to China at the time, even at the time, Nixon still had the upper hand, and America was a great power back then. America was different back then as well. I think, it was a very, very different country. They weren't really, Congress wasn't taken over by Zios and stuff like that. There was no APAC, or there was an APAC, but it's not as powerful as it is today. So yeah, America was a different country back then. Even when Nixon came into China at the time, and yeah, I think that was real diplomacy, guys. That was real diplomacy. And even back then, you had Henry Kissinger, I believe, and the real, when Nixon went to China back then in the 70s, you know, China was very close to the Soviet Union. And obviously, China had a few disagreements with the Soviet Union at the time as well. And America went to China because their enemy was Soviet Union, and they pulled off a great diplomatic win. They managed to get China on their side. That is real diplomacy, guys. That is real diplomacy. You know, you had Nixon, you had obviously Henry Kissinger doing his part as well. So they basically got China on America's side. They promised China that they would help them join the World Trade Organization, and they would send American businesses to China and to set up factories and all of that. That was a huge win. That was a huge, win back in the day. And when Nixon went to China, it created real results. You know, it changed the world. But Trump going to China, on the 15th, changed nothing, guys. He got nothing from China. And China gave him nothing. It was just a nothing trip. It was just basically Trump going there and like a holiday, enjoying his trip in China. But he got nothing out of it. Back then when Nixon and Kissinger went to China, they managed to get China on their side and away from the Soviet, clutches at the time. And that was a huge diplomatic win at the time. It was huge. You can't imagine, you know, what kind of diplomacy was needed to do something like that. But yeah, it's very, very different now. Very different. Times have really changed. So it's quite embarrassing for Trump that he came out of China for nothing, with nothing, because he was completely dazzled by China's, you know, welcome and all the the hospitality and everything like that. And he forgot about actual diplomacy. He forgot about the actual diplomacy. Came out with absolutely nothing. He got a few crumbs here and there, but they're not really nothing to move the earth or nothing to shake the world. These are just token gestures, I would say. Anyway, guys, this is the end of part one. If you want to see part two, I'm going to talk a bit more about this and also NVIDIA and a few other things as well. And I'm also going to be talking about the Americans throwing away all the Chinese gifts and things like that. And there's a lot to talk about in the second part. So head off to part two on my new channel and make sure you subscribe, watch the video from start to end. And it really helps with the algorithm. It really pushes the channel out. And yeah, guys, so I'll see you in part two, guys. Take care for now. Bye bye.